Good morning, folks, and welcome to the very first episode of Fintech Insider Breakfast Show, a new show where we're going to be trying to bring you the breaking news that's happening every morning. We're going to probably be doing this about 8:30 GMT every morning, and the idea being that given you guys are going to be pretty much cooped up for the next, we probably don't really understand how long, then what we want to try and do is keep you as entertained and as informed as we can do. So every morning at about 8:30, as I say, we'll bring you the latest breaking news from around the world of fintech and banking from myself and other people around the 11FS team, but a bunch of other friends of 11FS as well. So we'll be out there talking to various people out there in the industry to find out what their points are. Today, I'm going to be joined by our Chief Commercial Officer, Mr. Eric Fulwiler. How's it going, Eric?
I'm great. How are you?
Yeah, I mean, 3 days in, going slightly cabin feverish, but other than that, I'm good. I haven't run out of Nespresso pods just yet. Else the whole thing would be getting flipped right now.
That's going to be the real problem, right? The espresso pods and the wine.
It will be. I mean, literally, at this stage, if the internet went down, I think it would just be back into the dark ages. Do you know what? I've actually done a lot this week where I've discussed with my kids what like the war would be like, because essentially it would be like this, just you can't talk to anybody and the internet doesn't work and the lights don't work and the water doesn't work. So how are you held up?
Yeah, I'm good. I mean, I was in the office on Monday, so it's only been a couple of days for me working from home. I think it's interesting. I'm still trying to figure out my setup, even just the practicality of getting the Wi-Fi to work consistently seems like it's holding up, which is good. The kids are home from school now, so that's a whole thing to figure out, not just in terms of the time and attention that they need, but also how do we try to keep them structured so it's not like a weekend all the time. And then it's been interesting, I think, as a company, and a lot of companies are going through this, shifting everything to be remote working. And I think since we've had that baked in from the beginning in terms of how the company was started and also the flex work policies that we have, I think it's been a little bit of an easier transition. And then I've seen a lot of people rally behind coming up with new ideas and new ways to stay connected, new ways to stay plugged in. Alex, our audio engineer, coming up with the morning coffee kind of DJ set that he's been doing every day.
I love those
going around.
Yeah, I can't stress how much I love those videos from like the one from Alex yesterday. I think I watched about 4 times. So if anybody's watching hasn't seen that, head over to the 11FS Twitter channel where we've posted it. So our resident audio engineer is an amazing scratch DJ. Morning, Christina. How's it going? Thanks for joining us this morning. And I mean, Alex's thing, but we've been doing internally another thing that I found quite fun, which is the coffee setup as well. So for anybody who doesn't know, we sort of posted about this a couple of days ago, but there's an ongoing Google Hangout in 11FS right now where anybody who has 10 minutes free and has a cup of coffee jumps on that and has a cup of coffee with sort of 6 or 7 other people around the company, which is just a nice way of trying to keep everybody connected. But I mean, it's an interesting one, and we didn't intend on talking about this, but actually, I guess, I mean, I posted something on LinkedIn which sort of touched a nerve with a few people yesterday, which was, I mean, I sort of said, if you're now just preparing for remote working, you're kind of screwed. Because for me, I mean, sorry, Eric, I appreciate I'm taking this in a completely different direction that we sort of talked about. So if this freaks us everybody out, but essentially, for me, the idea that remote working isn't like enabled by like Zoom or Hangouts or Slack or whatever. It's like, to your point, it's a fundamental way of your culture working. So do you trust your people enough to not care where they are? I've always used Michael Bailey, one of the videographers, like literally, I think he was employee number 1 at 11FS, is a great example on this, which is like, I miss him when I don't see him. But genuinely, I trust him so much that I don't care where he is ever. He could be on the moon, and I know he'd still be taking his responsibilities really seriously.
Yeah, and I think the video calls and the Slack and all that stuff those are tools, right? But you really need that cultural foundation of how you set people up for success and how you push autonomy to the edges of the organization to allow those tools to actually work for you. So I think a lot of people are going through transition right now as individuals, as teams, as companies. And the thing that's going to be interesting is, it's week 1. of work from home. So how's it going to look? We don't know how long this is going to last. How's it going to look if it's week 3 or week 7? I think the compounding effects of just adjusting to this are going to make it an ongoing thing, not just okay, we're set up, we're good, but you're gonna have to keep coming back to it and making sure that your teams and your company are continuously healthy.
Agree. Thank you for everybody joining this morning. There's a bunch of people jumping on here. Hey, George Kelsey, how's it going? Great to talk to you yesterday. We've got Matthew Gardner jumping on here. We've got our very own Zoe Anstey jumping on as well. Sarah, like so many people kind of joining this morning, Eric. See, the pent-up demand of people stuck at home wanting to see 2 white guys talk about fintech. Like, clearly this was a thing. Right. So
I'm trying to set the bar high because I don't know when I'm going to be back up.
That's true. Well, so the thing that we wanted to sort of talk about today, and really, I think it's only a ticking time bomb before one of our kids kind of run into the background of one of these videos, basically. Like you've got 3 kids, haven't you, Eric?
I do, yeah.
And I've got 2. So just statistically, it's more likely one of yours is going to run in the background than mine right now. But the thing that I thought was really interesting that happened in the news the last couple of days was Revolut's launch. So Revolut, if for anybody who didn't see it, story over on TechCrunch, I think broke first. Revolut launches Junior Revolut to help managing allowances. And I think this is a really interesting thing. So they've launched a product specifically targeted at 7 to 17-year-olds, with beyond 17, them graduating into a full Revolut account. So parents or legal guardians who also have a Revolut users can create a Revolut Junior account for their kid within seconds by the looks of things. The kid gets a card sent out to them, and the app offers a set of features around divided in basically controlling the account, controlling the profile, setting allowances, all the basic stuff that you would kind of expect from a challenger right now in terms of freezing cards and online payments and all those different types of things. But it's a really interesting one because, I mean, we always talk about underserved and overcharged, and there's a lot of people doing things in this space right now with GoHenry or Osper or people like Rooster Money, really sort of pushing into this space. But arguably, I mean, like kids have been like super underserved for such a long period of time, right? And increasingly in a digital world, how do you like teach your kids the value of money? It's quite a difficult thing to do. What do you think to this, Harry? Do you think is this the type of thing you could see you giving to? I mean, you've probably got one of your girls is the right age for this, right?
Yes, yeah. So 3 girls, the oldest is 8, and so we've started kind of having those conversations with her. We use Monzo kind of for our day-to-day banking and savings, and so we have a little pot set up for her, and every month we give her a little bit and show her how it's growing. And then I've been trying to push a little bit of the entrepreneurial streak. We had a lemonade stand going that was incredibly successful over the summer. Oh my God, people just love that type of thing. So that was good. It's interesting. I actually never thought about it as kind of the underserved and overcharged, but I guess there is an angle for that. I thought about it as more of like a social cultural thing. In modern day society, at least in the US and the UK that I can speak to, where it's like we don't really talk about money, amongst even our own demographic. But I think also with kids, it's just so important that you start those conversations early. So to me, the way I think about this for my family and my girls is it's more about an educational thing than actually a functional, how do they get served better or charged less? From like a product standpoint, it's more they're going to start thinking about money, talking about money, understanding money earlier on. And I think that's really important. And it's, I wish that it was getting equal attention and push from the private sector of a lot of these startups that are bringing things to market and the public sector and education, because I think that's another huge area of opportunity that will have positive impact on the societies overall if the younger generations are learning about this stuff earlier.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think from a user's perspective, I think definitely there's the angle on this is, I don't think my kids know what paper money or coins is. Do you know what I mean? Like actually, and it's a difficult one because we live in a society that everything is instantaneous now. Like literally, kids don't really understand about waiting for anything. Everything they want is a push. Man, I'm sounding like a grumpy old man right now, aren't I? Like this is the isolation's bringing out the worst in me right now.
It's
But
bound to happen at some point.
I know. It was only a matter of time. But I mean, the idea that essentially you could, that kids just expect everything really instantaneously, that doesn't work with money. Because actually, if you're a 7-year-old and everything happens when you push a button, you get conditioned to expect everything in your life to happen, instantaneously. Which obviously, if you're then looking for savings for something, or saving up for a toy or a card or a whatever, I think it can lead to very unhappy adults, because that world of instant access to everything can lead to probably much more heavily reliance on credit and ultimately debt, really. I think the flip of this is, why have big banks not done this type of stuff? Because bravo to kind of Revolut and the guys kind of getting out there to do it, but I think the inhibitor for many parents kind of using something like a GoHenry or an OSPA to date has been sort of the charges. Because GoHenry are a standalone entity, they have to make it work by either a subscription fee or charges on transfers when you transfer money into the services. And I've been using GoHenry for the last 6 months with my two kids, Josh and Ivy, and it works great. But every time I transfer money in, I get charged for moving the money into the product. A gigantic bank should be able to use. I mean, in the olden days, like NatWest had a collection of piggy banks to get kids kind of into accounts. I remember having a Halifax account with a book with a lion on it, and I was very excited about it. So essentially, sort of using. I think big banks should have been using kids in the nicest possible way as like loss leaders for the next generation of their customers, because I mean, it's very smart from Revolut, because maybe the 7-year-olds aren't the target market, but actually if you can get 15 or 16 or 14-year-olds who are about to suddenly become mainstream users that are very heavily their target demographic for kind of getting in, I'd say the other thing on the bank side of things is they haven't been able to make really the cost efficiencies of these things work. If your mainstream current account costs you £200 a year to run, to make charges back for overdrafts and everything that you've got, suddenly if you're trying to provide an account for people who are definitely not going to make you money for 5 to 10 years, well, the trade-off between the macro strategy that actually makes this make sense for the next generation of current accounts and the micro view of actually the impact that this will have on your P&L for the next 3 to 4 years, I honestly just think people have been paralyzed by nobody doing anything in the market. So now we have big companies doing it. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how the big banks really come back from this, really.
Yeah. I mean, a couple things for me on that. One is, I don't know the statistics. I'm sure they're out there somewhere, but it's so interesting how many, when you ask people why they use the high street bank that they do, so many of them say, well, it's what my parents used, right? Yeah. So it was already there in front of them in terms of the acquisition model of how they were getting a lot of their customers, right? Of just it got grandfathered in because that you went with your parents to the bank when they went and they set up that account with the book with the lion on it early on and all that stuff. So you just kind of ended up in there. So it is interesting seeing fintech start to take a slice out of that funnel that was going to those banks. I was looking at the article. I don't know. I mean, for Revolut, it's a little bit more obvious, but for more of the standalone kid propositions like a GoHenry, I don't know if they've talked about what they're going to do once the kids graduate past a certain point, if they're going to try to expand into a full-fledged account for adults as well. But that's interesting. The other thing for me,
GoHenry's been going for a couple of years as well, so I would have thought. Yeah. I mean, there isn't any sort of announcements around that, but that actually would be a great revenue stream for those guys working with a major high street bank, right? You graduate to a NatWest account or whatever,
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's in there just because I don't know how much money they've raised, but no investor is going to give them any significant capital without that question being answered of like, all right, what happens after these kids turn 18? Sure. But what about the regulatory side of this? I don't know the answer, but from like a banking perspective, okay, that's more straightforward. But is there anything out there in the UK or US, just about like how you need to treat kids, like if you're marketing to or offering services to kids about money?
I don't think there's specific guidelines around, I mean, how the, usage of terminology but obviously, hey Johnny, you're going to get hit with 1500 APR, and the AER is such and such. They're going to be like, I'm going to talk to my mum and dad, like so. I mean, I don't think ever there's really direct communication from these organizations to the kids, if that makes sense. Most of this is sort of grandparented, grandfathered to the parents
Yeah.
actually as the guardian. But I
Yeah.
agree, though. I think as it
Yeah.
gets bigger and bigger, it's going to be interesting to see where the regulator steps in to a certain degree.
Yeah, because I'm also just thinking, as a parent, well, the idea here is that my kid is in this app where this bank can send them messages and push notifications and like all these things. So what are those, and how do I know that they're, doing the right thing? That type of.
I guess the other implication here is like it's expected now that a 7-year-old gets a phone.
Oh man, we're having that conversation with our 8-year-old right now. I'm trying to push it out as I can.
Well, are you not folding on that one then? No.
I'm not folding yet. So I think so. Dialing it all the way back, I think that fundamentally technology doesn't really change us. I think it just makes us more of who we are. And I think that every generation has the same conversations about how people want things instantaneously. And it was so much harder when I was your age. And it's just the specifics of what you say change. The conversation is exactly the same, right?
Yeah, and I remember them very well with our parents, right? I can remember my dad having that exact same conversation with me.
But I think with I think, sometimes there are negative effects to new technology, of course, but I think overall it's a positive progression and it moves things in the right direction. However, you need to know the right way to use it, and the whole kind of with power comes responsibility conversation. So that's the conversation we're having with our oldest, is like teaching her the implications of what it means to have a life online, and that anything you put out there people can see, and you have access to the world's information, which is amazing but also scary. And so you got to kind of balance those things. I don't, in my personal opinion, I wouldn't want to unleash that on her until we felt she was ready. At the same time, I do think that is the world that they're going to live in, of mobile phones and voice and instantaneous access to information and people. And so it is important, for me at least, that she learns that stuff earlier on, as opposed to just getting dropped into it at 14 without any real conversations or exposure to it.
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? I think it's like I say, we all like to think even us, we like to think we're really sort of ahead on what we're doing from a technological perspective. But I mean, kids are playing, like my kid plays games on his phone. He's sort of inherited one of my old iPhones basically, and he can talk to his friends on it. I mean, Jason was saying the other day, he will sit there playing a game with his kids, and he'll have his kid will be just live streaming one of his friends to each other. They say something to each other every so often, but they don't really, it's just the way in which people communicate changes, and it just, breaks old folks like ours brain. Lucy Heavens just made a really good point. So I had a conversation with somebody the other day who said we should stop trying to teach our kids how banking works and make banking work how they think. What do you think to that? Do you think actually banking traditional guidelines, the way it works has been around for like 300 years, right? So is this just the model is we're trying to fit our people to the model rather than the model working for people?
So let me make sure I understand the question. So it's teaching them the way banking is right now versus the way we think it's going to be when they grow up?
No, more. We should stop teaching our kids how banking works and make banking work for how they think. So more financial services should start fitting around kids and I guess everybody's lives for that point, because rather than just this is the way it is, kids, and deal.
I think I might have lost your audio. I don't know if it's me or you.
Oh no. Is that better?
There we go. There we
Wow,
go.
when you really want to prove that it's live or not, right? Yeah, so I mean, personally, for
Yeah,
me, I'd sort of say I think that's true. I mean, I think I don't think it's just true for kids, though. I'd say it's true for everybody. I mean, banking generally just needs to start providing things that people really need that adds value, rather than just saying, here's a current account, figure out how to use it and make it what you need, you know?
yeah, I totally agree, because at the end of the day, it's the whole jobs to be done methodology that we use in all the work that we do, which is people don't need banks, they need the services that banking provides. And you could apply that to any type of financial service. So it's much more about the value and the job that it does in people's lives, as opposed to how it's structured or how it works. Now, I do think that the more you can understand how something works, the more you can understand how to make it work for you. And so it just depends. I don't think I wouldn't completely ignore trying to teach my kids how the financial services kind of ecosystem works. But I think what's more important, to your point, is that they understand what it can do for them and how they need to think about it.
Hmm. So lots and lots and lots of comments. So I'm just going to run through a couple of these and see where we're at. So
It's multiple questions too.
yeah, definitely. I mean, point from George Kelsey here. So I use Go Henry for my younger son, Henry. Not sure if it was named after him, George. He thought I'd set up a bank up just for him. So, it just shows actually kids
That's
can really
cool.
sort of get behind something when it really sort of feels like it's for them.
How do you use David? How do you use Go Henry with your kids?
Yeah, I mean, I find it. I mean, it's great because you can, as George says, you can personalize the card. So like Ivy's is Go Ivy, and Josh's is Go Josh. So they can pick the image on the front of the card, and they're really proud of sort of carrying that around with them. But it's great because, I mean, the thing that you start to try and get into is it's not really just about having somewhere you can put money. It's about actually what are the bits of reward that we can give them for, I don't know, putting their dishes in the dishwasher or making their bed in the morning, or can we get chores kind of going, which actually then becomes like a really interesting argument slash conversation at home, because what should kids just do and what should kids expect to be paid for, which I think was an ongoing 2 or 3 months kind of conversation with Sarah, my wife, about what those things should be, because it's similar to like naming your kids. Until you start talking about these things with your partner, you never really understand where other people's frame of reference actually is for it. So, I mean, for me, when I was little, I mean, I got paid for like feeding the dogs or washing the car or those types of things, but I was expected to do a bunch of stuff. Like making your bed is not a
Yeah.
reward mechanism. It's just a thing you should do. But I mean, have you talked about that, Eric, at home as well? As like, do your kids get pocket money yet?
Not really, not in terms of spending. So we have like a savings pot for Stella, our oldest, and so we'll put a little bit in every month, but she's not actively spending it. And we haven't had that conversation about kind of the chores. I mean, for me growing up, I didn't really have an allowance, and it was more like if I did work, like real work, right, like weeding the garden or things above and beyond just the normal day to day, that's when I could potentially earn some pocket money. So that's kind of where my head's at, but we'll have to figure that out in the next couple of years.
It is hard though, because it's like, actually, if you start, if it suddenly starts feeling like tips, then your kids do something and expect something, whereas actually your kids just should be doing something. Do you know what I mean? I actually joked with Sarah, we should overpay on an allowance, and then charge them rent, and like go, okay, so here's the deductions we're making for your food and your board and the
Make it like
electricity.
real life. Yeah.
Yeah, but apparently I was being sort of dictatorial at that point, so
Yeah.
we reined it back a little bit.
It is such an opportunity for the fintech or even the incumbent players in this space, like the education and support for the conversations that need to happen around the use of the product, not just actually the functionality and the branding itself. So I imagine, I will go check this out, and I will go check out Go Henry. It might be time to be using one of those with our oldest, but I would imagine that's something that these companies are looking at investing in, is putting out that content to help support those conversations that need to happen at home.
Agree. I mean, there's an interesting point here from Chris Chamberlain saying, so there's a real issue here with lack of understanding of money with kids, but this is propagated by some of the parents not really understanding it either. You know, they say financial education starts as early as your parents kind of make it. And that's probably a really interesting thing, that most people just walking around don't really understand how financial services really works, because actually it's complicated, and you know, people use terminology to obfuscate the real reality of actually what those things actually mean. So
Yeah.
I mean, maybe this does start actually with parents really understanding banking, and then they can actually teach their kids.
Yep. Yeah, I agree with that. So it looks like we've also got a question from Javon Barnes. Interesting concept, these Hangouts. How many players do you realistically see operating well in this space? Do you think these could be washed out by more established firms offering similar products later down the line? So kind of similar to what we were talking about with the offerings. Yes, but
yeah, I'd say from my perspective on that, I think it's I would really dramatically expect the big banks to kind of strike back on this one, because it's not just a matter of losing the kids, it's losing the sort of future generation of current account users. And actually, if they lose that, then pretty much all bets are off at this point. So
yeah.
all right, guys. I think we're at the top of the hour, so we probably, Eric, I know me and you have got a meeting or two to go and jump on. So, guys, I hope you've enjoyed this morning. We're going to be doing this every morning going forwards. Hope that you got some value from this, and look forward to seeing you again tomorrow morning. Thanks very much.